Hey guys, Alex here with Serious Goose Games. Welcome back to our Unity Tactics RPG tutorial. Last time we added health bars so we can see how close our enemies are to death, or how close we are to death. Today we're going to start adding classes to our units. We're going to start by going to our scripts folder, and we're going to right click and create a new mono behavior. And this is going to be called unit class. Go ahead and open that up. And inside here, we're actually going to make this a scriptable object. So we're going to do square brackets, create asset menu. The file name is going to be new class. So that's the name of the file when you create it. The menu name is going to be scriptable objects. So scriptable objects, and then / new class. So this is going to create a menu when we right click in our project folder and go to create. This will create a menu for us called scriptable objects, and then a sub option in there called new class. Now, when we do scriptable objects, we don't inherit from mono behavior. Instead, we inherit from scriptable object. We can get rid of start and update, and we're going to create a public string called class name, then another public string called class description, and then we're going to create a public unit stats called base stats. This will be where we inherit our stats from. And then because of how we set up our unit stats, we can actually use the same struct to represent our growths as well, except instead of putting in like an integer, instead we can put in a percentage value and have those increase by that amount. So we'll do public unit stats, and we'll call them class growths. Now we can go to our unit script and add in our class. So we're going to do public unit class called unit class, and then Fire Emblem does this thing where the individual characters have their own stat growths on top of class stat growths. So if I have a character that is, say, a armor knight, that character might have a really high defensive stat. And that could be coming from the armor knight growths on top of their own personal stat growths that they have. So you can kind of combine the two stat growths and really play to a character's strength. So if you have a character with really high intelligence or whatever the magic stat is, you want to put them in a magic class to really take advantage of that. Or if you want your characters to be more well-rounded, you could put them in classes that maybe they wouldn't be so great in, but would still kind of round out their stats and make them kind of better at multiple things instead of specializing. That's generally a terrible way to do that. I wouldn't recommend it. But we're going to create a public unit stats called character growths. So now we're going to redo how we handle our stat generation, because right now it's a lot of random.range, and we don't want that. So inside our unit stats, we're going to create a public const float called stat variance, and this is going to be equal to 5f by default. You can change this to whatever, but basically this is how much kind of randomness will allow the stats to have wiggle room for. That way each playthrough is kind of a little bit different, and there's that kind of RNG element of, is this run going to give me a really strong version of this character, or is it going to give me a really weak version of this character? Kind of gives them something to look at and strategize around. Because if you rely on a character for one playthrough and then you play it again and suddenly that character is not getting really good stat growth, they might not perform as well and you might have to change your strategy. So if you want more variation, this number should be bigger. So now we're going to create a little helper function to handle randomizing a stat value using that variance. So we're going to create a public static float called initialize stat value. And for an argument, we want to pass in our float base value and a float for our gross. And we're going to create a float in here for our minimum. And this is going to be equal to our base value minus our gross times our stat variance. So basically, if we're passing in a base value of 5 and our growth is 3, then we're looking at a minimum value of, next we're going to create a float for our max, and it's going to be the same thing as we're adding to it. Now, one issue we have here is this could return 0 or less than 0. It could give us a negative number, and we don't really want that. So what we're going to do is clamp it. So float min is equal to mathf.clamp. We'll clamp that value between 0 and float.max value. And we don't really need to worry about our maximum being clamped because it's not going to be below 0 ever. But this will make sure that we never have a negative stat, because that could do some real weird math things. And then we're going to return mathf.round random.range min max. Let's hop back over to our unit script. We're going to add a new function to handle initializing all of these stats. Because right now we have update stat values, which just kind of sets our stats based on our stat values, but we need to actually initialize all of them. So we're going to do a public void initialize stats, and inside here we're going to do unit stats, and we're going to call it base class stats, and this is going to be equal to unit class.base stats. Then we're going to have another one, so unit stats called growth stats, and this is going to be equal to unit class dot base not base stats, class growths. And so at the moment you can see that we are not actually incorporating our personal growths yet. That's something we'll have to add later. But for now, let's finish initializing. We're going to do stats is equal to a new unit stats. And the way I format this is going to be a little weird, but hopefully easier to read. So we're going to do our parentheses. I'm going to hit enter, and we're going to do unit stats dot initialize stat value. We're going to put in our base class stats dot speed and our growth stats dot speed, followed by a comma. And we basically need to do this for every stat value. So I'm going to copy and paste. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So after speed, we have our perception. We basically just want these to line up with the constructor we have in our unit stats. So all of those are plugged in. Make sure that you've got your commas at the end of every line except for the last one, which should have a second parentheses and a semicolon. And now we can call this from the start. So we go all the way up to start. And instead of this line here where we're doing our stats like that, we can actually get rid of that now and just call initialize stats, which makes our start method a little nicer to look at. Once you've done all of that, go ahead and save everything and head back to Unity. So we're going to go to our assets folder and we're going to create a new folder in here. So create folder, we'll call it scriptable objects. Go ahead into that folder, create another new folder called classes, and then open up that folder, right click inside there, go to create. You can see now we have the scriptable objects menu, and if we look inside, new class. So if I click that, it creates a new class for us. I'm going to start out by creating a tank class. We'll have actual classes with names and stories and all that later. But class name, tank, class description, chunker, base stats. These don't have to be super crazy. Really, numbers tweaking is something we can do later when we kind of balance things, polish things up. So you can kind of put random numbers in here. I'm going to probably put it between 10 and 20 just to kind of elevate a little bit. And then the growths I'll put between like 0 and 10. So the tank I want to be kind of slow. So we'll do 10 for speed. And I'll kind of work my way through the stats it's worst in. So let's say intellect will be 11. Luck can be 12. Perception can be 13. Mastery can be 14. All right, so there's our first class, and I could go through and make different classes. We could have like a fighter, we could have a support, but for now I'm just going to stick with the tank. And we want to make sure that our units all have classes. So I'm going to select all 3, and I'm going to give it the tank class. Character growths, really we don't need to do anything with those. We can leave those for now. We also want to make sure the enemy unit has a class, so we're going to give them the tank class as well. So go ahead and save. And I'm not going to go into this maximize because we have no way to actually see that that's working. So if I hit play, we should see kind of our base stats different among them, but endurance should always be the biggest stat. And oof, boy, our third unit has some endurance, 47, a strength of 35. He is beefy. Like, his physical defense is only 1, apparently, but that's because our formula for that is really low. So again, tweaking numbers is something we have to do. But this does show that it is working. Our units all have stats that are generated based on our class. So we can really create classes and tailor them to specific stats, different playstyles, and really make sure that each class has that feel for whatever the class is supposed to be. So these guys are all going to be super tanky, whereas a fighter might be a little faster. They might be able to move further and they might hit harder, but they won't be able to take as much of a beating. The other nice thing about how we set this up is each character can also have their own personal growths, which is going to make it even better for players to customize kind of their teams and their styles. And it will help make each character feel unique from other units of the same class. So if I've got 2 tanks, their personal growths will help them feel different from each other on top of their current stat variants. And if we decide we want to let players switch between classes at will, it is super important that we make sure each character feels unique and different. But this is just the start of our class system. In the next video, we are going to make sure that our leveling system uses our stat growths. So right now, stats are completely random when we level. We want to make it so our level up also uses our class growths and our character growths. That's all for today, though. So if you found this video helpful, hit like and subscribe to help other devs find this series. Let me know in the comments, what are some roles specific to tactics games that classes could fill? Fire Emblem has a ton of character archetypes that are based on unit classes and character designs. These archetypes appear in most of the games, a big example being like the Christmas Cavaliers. As always, thanks for watching. I'm Alex with Serious Goose Games, and I'll see you in the next one.